The August sun beat down mercilessly on the barren stretch of land that Ruth Whitaker called home. She stood at the edge of her property, one hand shading her eyes as she surveyed the withered corn stalks that struggled against the Arizona drought. Her calloused fingers tightened around the handle of her water bucket, knowing full well it was barely half full from the drying well. A year had passed since Tom's death, yet the ache in her chest remained as raw as the day she'd found his body sprawled beside their overturned wagon, 3 bullet wounds darkening his shirt. The border raiders had taken everything of value, their savings, the good horses, even Tom's pocket watch that had belonged to his father. They'd left her with nothing but grief and 40 acres of unforgiving land. Ruth adjusted her faded bonnet and headed back toward the small adobe house. At 32, she was still young by frontier standards, but the desert had already begun etching lines around her eyes, and her once soft hands had grown rough from endless labor. The neighboring ranchers in Mercy's Bend had made their interest known. A widow with property was a practical match, but Ruth couldn't stomach their calculating gazes or their assumptions that she needed a man to survive. The journey to town that morning had been necessary but grueling. Her old mule, Samson, pulled the rickety cart along the rutted trail as Ruth sat rigid on the bench, her meager offerings of eggs and vegetables secured in the back. The dozen eggs would fetch enough for flour and salt, while the withered carrots and turnips might bring a few cents more if she was lucky. In Mercy's Bend, the townspeople had watched her with their usual mixture of pity and suspicion. "Widow Whitaker," they whispered, still trying to work that cursed land alone. Some said it was pride that kept her there. Others claimed she'd gone touched in the head after Tom's killing. Ruth ignored them all, conducting her business with Martha Henderson at the general store with quiet efficiency. "You ought to consider the Reverend's offer," Martha had said, not unkindly, as she counted out Ruth's coins. "A woman alone out there, it ain't natural or safe." Ruth had merely nodded, tucking the money into her worn leather pouch. She'd heard the same words 100 times before, but that land was all she had left of Tom, of their dreams, of the children they'd never have. She'd die before she gave it up. The journey home took her along Skeleton Creek, where a thin trickle of water still flowed despite the drought. She'd stopped to let Samson drink, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood and allowing herself a moment's rest. The afternoon heat made the air shimmer like water, and the only sounds were the mule's slurping and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. That's when she saw him. At first, Ruth thought it was a trick of the heat, a dark shape among the rocks near the creek bed. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was a man, sprawled motionless in the shade of a boulder. Her first instinct was to flee. These borderlands were full of dangers, bandits, deserters, men who'd kill for a mule and cart, but something made her hesitate. The stillness of the figure, the awkward angle of his limbs, against every shred of common sense Tom had tried to instill in her. Ruth climbed down from the cart and approached cautiously, her hand on the old Colt revolver at her hip. The man was Apache. That much was clear from his long black hair and the traditional clothing, though it was torn and stained dark with what could only be blood. He was massive, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and powerful arms that even in unconsciousness spoke of great strength. A warrior, no doubt, the kind the newspapers wrote about in lurid detail, the kind that made decent folk lock their doors at night. 3 bullet wounds marked his body, one in the shoulder, another in his side, and a graze along his thigh. His breathing was shallow, labored. He'd lost a significant amount of blood, judging by the dark stains on the ground beneath him. Whoever had shot him had left him for dead, and by rights, he should have been. Ruth stood frozen, her mind racing. The prudent thing, the safe thing, would be to leave him here. Let the desert claim him as it claimed so many others. No one would blame her. In fact, they'd call her sensible for not getting involved with Apache business. The military at Fort Buchanan had standing orders to shoot Apache warriors on sight. The Indian Wars might be winding down elsewhere, but here in Arizona territory, the violence continued to simmer. But as she looked at his face, slack in unconsciousness, she saw not a savage, but a man. a dying man. And something in her chest, some remnant of the woman she'd been before grief hardened her heart, wouldn't let her walk away. "Lord help me, I must be losing my mind," she muttered, kneeling beside him. His skin was hot with fever, and when she pressed her fingers to his neck, his pulse was weak but steady. The wounds were at least a day old, maybe 2. How he'd survived this long in the heat was a mystery. Ruth looked around nervously, half expecting to see soldiers or Apache warriors emerging from the rocks. But the landscape remained empty, save for a pair of circling vultures high overhead, making her decision. Ruth returned to the cart and retrieved her water canteen. She dribbled a small amount between the man's cracked lips, watching as he swallowed reflexively. His eyes remained closed, but a soft groan escaped him. "You're too big for me to lift," she told him, though she doubted he could hear. "But I can't leave you here to die." It took all her ingenuity and most of her strength to maneuver him onto the cart. Ruth used the mule's lead rope and a blanket to create a crude travois, rolling him onto it inch by painful inch. The Apache warrior groaned several times but never fully woke, lost in some fevered dream. By the time she had him secured in the cart bed, Ruth was drenched in sweat and shaking with exhaustion. The journey home took twice as long as usual. Ruth chose the back trails, avoiding the main road where she might encounter other travelers. Her heart hammered with each creak of the cart wheels, each snort from Samson. If anyone saw her now, a white woman alone with a wounded Apache warrior, there would be no explaining it away. At best, they'd call her a traitor. At worst, she didn't want to think about the worst. The sun was setting by the time she reached her property, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Ruth had never been so glad to see her humble adobe house. She pulled the cart as close to the door as possible, then faced the challenge of getting the unconscious man inside. It took another hour of struggle, using boards as a ramp and every ounce of her determination. But finally, she had him on the straw mattress in what had been Tom's sick room, a small space off the main house where she'd nursed him through his final illness 2 winters ago. The Apache warrior looked incongruous there, his massive frame dwarfing the narrow bed, his dark skin a stark contrast to her mother's white quilt. Ruth lit a lamp and examined his wounds more closely. The shoulder wound was the worst, still seeping blood. The bullet appeared to have passed through, which was good. She wouldn't have to dig it out. Her hands trembled as she gathered her supplies, the bottle of whiskey she'd hidden from Tom, her sewing kit, clean rags torn from her petticoat. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered to the unconscious man as she cleaned the wounds. "I'm no doctor, but I'll do my best." She worked through the night, cleaning and stitching, fighting infection with whiskey and prayer. The warrior stirred several times, muttering in what she assumed was Apache, but never fully woke. His fever raged, and Ruth bathed his face with cool water, remembering how she'd done the same for Tom in his final days. As dawn broke through the single window, Ruth sat back on her heels. Exhausted beyond measure, she'd done all she could. The rest was in God's hands, if God cared about the fate of an Apache warrior and the foolish woman who'd saved him. She studied his face in the morning light, noting the strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the numerous scars that spoke of a violent life. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than herself. His hands, resting on the quilt, were surprisingly elegant despite their size, with long fingers that might have belonged to a pianist in another life. "What am I going to do with you?" Ruth asked softly. "What have I done?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered. Outside, the desert was waking up, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Ruth rose stiffly, knowing she had animals to tend, chores that wouldn't wait for her crisis of conscience. But first, she barred the door and pulled the curtains tight. Whatever came next, no one could know about the man in her back room. Her life, and his, depended on it. The warrior's eyes opened on the 3rd day, dark and wild, like a trapped wolf's. Ruth had been changing his bandages when she felt him tense beneath her hands. She froze, meeting his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he tried to rise, and she pressed him back with surprising firmness. "No," she said clearly. "You're hurt. Stay still." His hand shot out, catching her wrist in a grip that could have snapped bone. Ruth didn't flinch, though fear coursed through her veins. She kept her eyes steady on his, willing him to understand she meant no harm. Gradually, his grip loosened, though he didn't release her entirely. "Water," she said, pointing to the pitcher with her free hand. "You need water." Something shifted in his expression, perhaps recognition of the word, or simply an acknowledgement of his thirst. He released her wrist, and Ruth poured water into a cup, helping him drink. His dark eyes never left her face, tracking every movement with the intensity of a predator. Over the following days, they developed a crude system of communication. Ruth would point to objects and say their names in English. Sometimes he would respond with the Apache word, his voice deep and rough from disuse. She learned that water was tu and food was ban. He was Taza. She discovered when she pointed to him questioningly, the name meant big or large, which seemed fitting given his imposing stature. "Ruth," she said, placing her hand on her chest. He studied her for a moment, then attempted the name. Rut. Close enough. His recovery was slow but steady. The fever broke on the 5th day, and by the end of the first week, he could sit up without assistance. Ruth maintained careful boundaries, always knocking before entering the room, never touching him except when tending his wounds. She'd moved Tom's old rifle just outside the door, where Taza could see it, a reminder that she wasn't helpless, but also that she chose not to use it. The strain of keeping him secret began to wear on her. She couldn't go to town for supplies without leaving him alone, vulnerable. Her stores were running low, the flour barrel nearly empty, the last of the salt pork consumed. She'd been supplementing their meals with whatever she could forage, prickly pear fruits, mesquite pods, the occasional rabbit she managed to snare. It was during her second week of isolation that Samuel Morrison appeared at her door. Ruth heard his horse approaching and quickly ensured Taza's door was closed before answering. "Mrs. Whitaker." Morrison tipped his hat. He was a widower himself, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the valley, and had made his interest in her land, and her, known on several occasions. "Haven't seen you in town lately. Thought I'd check on you." "That's kind of you, Mr. Morrison, but I'm quite well." Ruth kept her body in the doorway, blocking his view inside. His pale eyes narrowed slightly. "Martha Henderson mentioned you seemed poorly last time you were in, said you bought medical supplies." Ruth's mind raced. Just preparing for winter, one can't be too careful living alone. Indeed. Morrison's gaze swept over what he could see of the house. "You know, my offer still stands. This land would fetch a good price, and you'd be well taken care of at my ranch. It's not fitting for a woman like you to live out here alone. I appreciate your concern, but my answer hasn't changed." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Pride goeth before a fall. Mrs. Whitaker, these are dangerous times. Apache raiders have been hitting settlements to the south, a woman alone." He let the threat hang in the air. "I have Tom's rifle and know how to use it. A rifle's no good against a war party." He leaned closer, and Ruth caught the scent of tobacco and pomade. "Strange things have been happening. Bill Hayes swears he saw wagon tracks leading from Skeleton Creek to your property. Deep tracks, like someone was hauling something heavy." Ruth's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. Perhaps Mr. Hayes should mind his own business instead of spreading tales. Morrison's face darkened. "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone should inform Marshal Keller that you're hiding something out here." "Good day, Mr. Morrison." Ruth began to close the door. He stopped it with his boot. "Think about my offer. Ruth, think real hard. Next time I come calling, I might not be alone." After he left, Ruth sagged against the door, her whole body trembling. She heard movement from Taza's room and found him standing despite his injuries, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes alert. "Man, trouble?" he asked in halting English. Ruth nodded. Big trouble. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't keep hiding him indefinitely, but he wasn't strong enough to leave. They needed to be able to communicate better if they were going to survive this. She brought her Bible into his room, not to preach, but because it was the only book she owned. Using simple drawings in the margins, she began teaching him more English words. Taza proved to be a quick learner, his intelligence evident despite the language barrier. In return, he taught her Apache words, smiling slightly when she mangled the pronunciation. Why? He asked one evening, gesturing to his bandages and then to her. Why? Help? Ruth considered how to answer. How could she explain the impulse that had driven her to save him? You were dying, she said simply. I couldn't let you die. He studied her face for a long moment. White men kill Apache. Apache kill white men. You... He paused, searching for words. Different. Maybe I'm just foolish, Ruth said with a bitter smile. No. His response was firm. Brave. The compliment warmed her in a way she didn't expect. It had been so long since anyone had seen her as anything but poor widow Whitaker, the woman too stubborn to accept her fate. As Taza grew stronger, he began helping with small tasks. Ruth would find firewood stacked by the door, though she'd never seen him leave his room. Once, she discovered that he'd repaired the loose board in the porch that had been troubling her for months. He moved like a shadow despite his size, and she understood how he'd survived as a warrior. But their fragile peace was shattered when Reverend Collins arrived with a small delegation from town. Ruth saw them coming from the window, the Reverend, Marshal Keller, and two other men she recognized as Morrison's hands. Hide, she hissed to Taza, who was sitting at the kitchen table. Without question, he melted away into the back room. Ruth met them on the porch, rifle in hand. Gentlemen, now, Mrs. Whitaker, Reverend Collins began in his sanctimonious tone. There's no need for weapons among Christian folks. State your business, Reverend. Marshal Keller stepped forward. He was a hard man with cold eyes who'd gained his position through brutality rather than any sense of justice. We've had reports of suspicious activity around your property, ma'am. It's my duty to investigate. What kind of reports? Lights at odd hours. Sounds that don't belong. Morrison here says you've been acting strange, defensive. Keller's hand rested on his pistol. In these troubled times, we can't be too careful about Apache sympathizers. Ruth's grip tightened on the rifle. Are you accusing me of something, Marshal? Just doing my job, ma'am. Now, we'd like to look around, make sure everything's as it should be. Do you have any legal authority to search my property? Keller's smile was cold. This is the territory, Mrs. Whitaker, not some eastern city. I'm the legal authority. Ruth knew she couldn't refuse without raising more suspicion. Fine, but I'll be watching every move you make. They searched the main house first, poking through her meager possessions with casual disrespect. One of Morrison's men pocketed a small silver frame, the only picture she had of Tom, but Ruth bit her tongue. When they moved toward the back room, her heart nearly stopped. But the room was empty. The bed was made. No sign of Taza except for a faint indentation in the mattress that could have been anything. Ruth didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Where had he gone? Satisfied? She asked as they emerged. What's in the barn? Keller asked. They searched there too, finding nothing but Samson and her few chickens. It wasn't until they were mounted and ready to leave that Morrison spoke up. You can't keep this up forever. Ruth, sooner or later, you'll need help. And when that day comes, you might find folks less willing to offer it. After they left, Ruth searched frantically for Taza. She found him in the root cellar, folded into an impossibly small space for such a large man. He was trembling, not from fear, she realized, but from the effort of remaining still while his injuries protested. How did you know? She asked, helping him out. Hiding, he said simply. Apache, learn young. That night, neither of them slept. They sat by the dying fire, aware that the walls were closing in. Ruth knew it was only a matter of time before someone found proof of Taza's presence. And when that happened, they would both pay the price, he with his life, and she with her reputation at best, her life at worst. "You should go," she said quietly. "You're strong enough now. Head south to Mexico, or find your people." Taza was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful but clear. "My people think me dead, betrayed at peace council, white soldiers and Apache enemies together." His jaw tightened. "No home now, only—" He gestured between them, and Ruth understood. They were both outcasts now, bound together by circumstances neither had chosen, but both had accepted. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of peace. "Then we'll face whatever comes," she said. "Together." Taza nodded slowly, and in the firelight, she thought she saw something in his eyes that went beyond mere gratitude, something that matched the growing warmth in her own chest, a connection forged not just by necessity, but by choice, by the small moments of humanity they'd shared across an impossible divide. Outside, a coyote howled, and the desert wind rattled the windows. But inside, for the first time in over a year, Ruth didn't feel alone. The autumn winds brought change to the desert, turning the scorching days bearable and the nights almost cold. Ruth had grown accustomed to Taza's presence in her home, their strange partnership evolving into something deeper than mere survival. They moved around each other with practiced ease, two souls learning to share space after years of solitude. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the silence between them no longer awkward but companionable. Taza had taken to carving, small figures from mesquite wood that he left around the house. Ruth would find them in unexpected places, a bird on the windowsill, a horse by the water bucket. She never mentioned them, but she kept each one. "Tell me," Taza said one night, his English much improved, "about your man, Tom." Ruth's hand stilled on her mending. She rarely spoke of Tom, even to herself. "He was kind, gentle, a schoolteacher back in Ohio before we came west." She smiled sadly. "He wasn't made for this life, but he tried. Lord, how he tried." "How did he?" Taza made a gesture that needed no translation. "Border raiders. 3 men. They wanted our savings, but Tom had already spent it on seed and supplies. They shot him anyway." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the fabric. "I found him by the wagon. He was still alive, barely. Held his hand while he left." Taza was quiet for a long moment. "You are strong, stronger than warrior." "I'm not strong," Ruth said. "I'm just too stubborn to die." "Same thing," Taza replied. And despite everything, Ruth found herself smiling. She learned his story in pieces. He had been called Red Hawk for his keen vision and hunting prowess. His father had been a respected chief, his mother a medicine woman. Taza had been groomed for leadership, trained in both war and diplomacy, but the world was changing, the old ways dying. General Howard came for peace. Taza explained one night, his face hard with memory. "Said we could keep our lands if we stopped raiding. Many believed him. He paused, searching for words. "I had doubts, but my father said we must try." The Peace Council had been a trap. Soldiers and enemy Apache working together. Old grudges settled under the guise of negotiation. Taza had fought his way out, but not before seeing his father fall, not before taking bullets meant to ensure no witnesses survived. "They think me dead," he said. "Perhaps better that way." "No," Ruth said firmly. "You're alive. That means something. That has to mean something." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them. Ruth felt it like a physical thing, a pull, a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. She looked away first, her cheeks burning. As winter approached, their situation grew more precarious. Ruth's trips to town were met with increasing hostility. Prices for her goods were suddenly higher, credit refused. Women crossed the street to avoid her, whispering behind their hands. "That Morrison's been talking," Martha Henderson told her quietly during one visit. "Says you're not right in the head, living alone out there." Says maybe someone should check on you more. Official-like. Ruth knew what that meant. They were building a case to declare her incompetent, to seize her land legally. Time was running out. The first snow came early, unusual for the desert. Ruth woke to find a thin blanket of white covering the ground, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. She found Taza standing at the window, watching the snow fall with wonder. "We didn't get much snow in our mountains," he said. "When it came, the children would celebrate. My sister." He stopped, pain flickering across his features. Ruth moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Tell me about her." "Little Dove, she had, what is the word, dimples when she smiled, always laughing, always singing." His voice grew thick. "She was at the council, 12 winters old." Without thinking, Ruth reached out and took his hand. His fingers engulfed hers, calloused and strong. For a moment, they stood frozen, both aware they had crossed some invisible line. "I'm sorry," Ruth whispered, though whether for his loss or for her boldness, she wasn't sure. Taza turned their joined hands over, studying the contrast, his deep brown against her pale skin. "Do not be sorry," he said softly. "You give me something I thought gone forever." "What's that?" "Hope." That night, the storm worsened. Wind howled around the adobe walls, and snow piled against the windows. They kept the fire burning high, but still the cold crept in. Ruth found herself shivering despite her heaviest shawl. "Come," Taza said, gesturing to the space beside him near the fire. "Cold is enemy to both Apache and white." Ruth hesitated. Propriety, what was left of it, warred with practicality and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. Slowly, she moved to sit beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "You know," she said, needing to fill the charged silence, "I never thought that is, Tom and I tried for children, but it never happened. The doctor said I was barren, just another failure to add to the list." "Not failure," Taza said firmly. "Life gives what it gives, does not make woman less. Tell that to the good people of Mercy's Bend. A woman who can't give her husband children isn't much of a woman at all." Taza made a sound of disgust. "Your people, sometimes—" He shook his head. "Apache value women for strength, wisdom, spirit. Children are blessing, yes, but woman is complete alone." Ruth felt tears sting her eyes. It was the first time anyone had suggested she might be whole just as she was. "Your people sound wiser than mine." "Wisdom didn't save us," Taza said bitterly. They sat in silence, watching the fire dance. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their small shelter, a different kind of intensity was building. Ruth was acutely aware of every inch between them, of the way the firelight played across Taza's features, of the steady rise and fall of his chest. "Ruth," he said, and her name on his lips was like a caress. "I need to speak truth." She turned to face him, her heart hammering. "What truth?" "When fever took me, I dreamed, saw the spirit world, saw ancestors. They told me I would die." He paused, his dark eyes intense. "Then I woke, and you were there, saving one who should be enemy. Risking everything." "You're not my enemy," Ruth said softly. "No," he agreed. "But what am I?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Ruth knew she should retreat, should maintain the careful boundaries that had kept them safe, but she was tired of being safe, tired of being alone. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I feel—" She couldn't finish, couldn't put words to the tumult inside her, but she didn't need to. Taza's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with impossible gentleness. "I feel too," he said simply. The kiss, when it came, was like nothing Ruth had experienced. Tom had been gentle, almost apologetic in his affections. This was different, a meeting of equals, of two wounded souls finding solace in each other. Taza's lips were warm and sure, and Ruth felt something inside her, something she'd thought dead. Spark to life. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Ruth's hand had somehow found its way to Taza's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart through his shirt. "This is," she began. "Dangerous." He finished. "Wrong, your people would say. Mine too, maybe." "Yes." They looked at each other, acknowledging the truth. Then Taza smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his stern features. "But we are already outcasts. What is one more broken rule?" Ruth laughed, surprising herself. When had she last truly laughed? When you put it that way. They came together again, and this time there was no hesitation. The storm outside seemed to echo the tempest within as they held each other. Two people who had never expected to feel warmth again, finding it in the most unlikely place. Later, as the fire burned low and the storm began to calm, they lay entwined on the buffalo hide rug, a blanket covering them. Ruth traced the scars on Taza's chest, each one a story of survival. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Taza's arm tightened around her. Now we live, day by day, together. They'll come for us. Morrison, Keller, all of them. When they find out, let them come," Taza said with quiet ferocity. "I have something to protect now, something worth fighting for." Ruth pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sage and wood smoke that clung to his skin. For the first time since Tom's death, perhaps for the first time ever, she felt truly alive, not just surviving, but living. "So do I," she whispered. "So do I." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the desert in pristine white. But inside the small adobe house, two hearts beat as one, defying a world that would see them apart. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, its dangers. But tonight, in the glow of dying embers, there was only this, only them. And for now, it was enough. Dawn came slowly, painting the snow-covered desert in shades of rose and gold. Ruth woke to find Taza already awake, his dark eyes watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The reality of what had passed between them settled over her like a weight. She began, suddenly uncertain. "Regret?" he asked quietly. Ruth considered the question honestly. She should regret it. Everything she'd been taught, every social convention, every moral lesson screamed that what they'd done was wrong. But looking at him, at the man who had shown her more tenderness in one night than she'd known in years of marriage, she felt only peace. "No," she said firmly. "No regret." Relief flickered across his features before his expression grew serious. "Ruth, what I said in night, I meant, you are mine now, in Apache way. When man and woman choose each other, they are bound, but you—" He paused, struggling with the words. "You must be sure. Your world will not forgive this." Ruth sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "My world abandoned me the day Tom died. I've been a ghost to them, existing but not living, until you." "Then we must leave," Taza said decisively. "Go far from here, Mexico, maybe, or California, somewhere we can be without past chasing us." "This is my home," Ruth protested, though even as she said it, she knew he was right. "Tom and I built this place. Our dreams are buried in this soil. Dreams can grow in new soil," Taza said gently, "but only if we live to plant them." Before Ruth could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the morning quiet. Many horses, too many for a social call. Ruth scrambled for her clothes while Taza moved with swift efficiency, gathering his few possessions. "The canyon trail," Ruth said urgently. "Behind the rock formation. It leads to the old Apache paths through the mountains. Take Samson and—" "No," Taza interrupted. "I do not run. Not anymore. Not from them. You have to. They'll kill you. And what they do to you?" His face was hard with determination. "Woman who sheltered Apache, who lay with Apache, death might be kindness compared to their justice." Ruth heard the horses stopping outside, men dismounting. Morrison's voice carried clear through the morning air, giving orders. Her hands shook as she finished dressing, but her mind was strangely calm. "Then we face them together," she said. Taza caught her arm as she moved toward the door. "Ruth, if something happens, know that you gave me life twice. Once when you pulled me from death. Once when you showed me reason to live. Nothing's going to happen," Ruth said fiercely. "We're going to walk out of here, get on that wagon, and leave. Together." But when she opened the door, her heart sank. Morrison had brought a small army, at least 15 men, including Marshal Keller and several soldiers from Fort Buchanan. They were arranged in a semicircle around her house, rifles at the ready. "Mrs. Whitaker," Morrison called out, sitting tall on his black stallion. "Or should I say, Miss Ruth, since it appears your marriage vows mean so little to you. My husband is dead, Mr. Morrison. My vows died with him. But not your decency, it seems." His eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "We know he's in there. The Apache, Mrs. Chen saw him through your window last week when she came to deliver eggs. Took her this long to work up the courage to report it." Ruth lifted her chin. "I don't know what you're talking about. Lying doesn't become you." Morrison dismounted, approaching slowly. "Did you really think you could harbor a savage, a murderer, and no one would find out? Did you think you could betray your own kind and face no consequences? The only savages I see," Ruth said clearly, "are the ones pointing guns at an unarmed woman." Morrison's face darkened. "Marshal, do your duty." Keller stepped forward, but before he could speak, Taza emerged from the house. Ruth heard the collective intake of breath from the assembled men, saw hands tighten on weapons. In the morning light, Taza looked every inch the Apache warrior. Tall, powerful, unbowed. "I am here," he said in clear English. "Woman did not harbor me. I forced her, threatened her. She is innocent. No!" Ruth moved to stand beside him. "That's not true. I saved him of my own free will. I tended his wounds, gave him shelter, and I'd do it again." "Ruth," Taza said warningly. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." She faced Morrison squarely. "Yes, I saved him. Yes, I sheltered him, because I couldn't stand by and watch a man die, regardless of his race. If that makes me a traitor, then so be it. More than a traitor, from what we've heard," Morrison said with a nasty smile. "Apache whore suits you better." The slur hung in the air like a physical thing. Ruth felt Taza tense beside her, saw his hand move slightly toward the knife at his belt. She caught his wrist, holding him still. "Your words say more about you than they do about me, Mr. Morrison," she said quietly. "Enough talk." Keller interrupted. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I'm placing you both under arrest. The Apache for murder, theft, and crimes against the white settlers of this region. You, Mrs. Whitaker, for harboring a fugitive and moral turpitude. I've committed no murders here," Taza said. "Killed no white men in this territory. Every Apache's a murderer." Someone in the crowd shouted, "How many of our people have your kind butchered? How many of mine have yours?" Taza responded calmly. The tension ratcheted higher. Ruth could feel the violence brewing, knew it would take only a spark to ignite. She made a decision. "I'll come quietly," she said, "but only if you guarantee Taza safe passage to Mexico. He's done nothing but defend himself. Let him go, and I'll confess to whatever you want." "No," Taza said sharply. "Ruth, no." Morrison laughed. "You're hardly in a position to bargain, woman, but I'll make you a counteroffer. Renounce him. Publicly admit you were coerced, that you're sorry for your sins. Agree to marry me, and I'll see he gets a trial instead of a bullet." The proposal was so unexpected, so audacious, that Ruth could only stare. "Marry you? I've wanted this land for years," Morrison said frankly. "And you're still young enough to be useful. With a firm hand to guide you, you could be rehabilitated, made respectable again. I'd rather die," Ruth said flatly. Morrison's face twisted. That can be arranged." What happened next occurred so fast Ruth could barely process it. One of the soldiers, young and nervous, saw Taza's slight movement as a threat. He fired. The bullet caught Taza in the shoulder, the same one Ruth had so carefully tended. He staggered but didn't fall. "No!" Ruth screamed, moving to support him. All hell broke loose. Taza, despite his wound, managed to throw his knife, catching the soldier who'd shot him in the thigh. Men shouted, horses reared, in the chaos. Ruth grabbed Tom's rifle from inside the door. "Stop!" she shouted, firing into the air. "Everyone stop!" Miraculously, they did. Ruth stood in front of Taza, rifle raised, her face fierce with determination. "The first man who moves toward us, I shoot. And unlike my late husband, I don't miss." "You wouldn't dare," Morrison said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Try me." Ruth's voice was steady as stone. "I've lost everything else. What's one more sin on my soul?" "Ruth," Taza said behind her, his voice strained with pain. "Cannot win this." "Maybe not," she agreed, "but I can make them pay dear for our lives." A tense standoff ensued. Ruth knew she couldn't hold them off forever, but she was beyond caring. If this was how their story ended, at least they would end it together, fighting. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice rang out. "What in the name of all that's holy is going on here?" Everyone turned to see Martha Henderson approaching in her wagon, accompanied by Reverend Davies, not Collins, but the older, more moderate minister from the Mexican congregation. Behind them came several other wagons, filled with some of the Mexican and mixed-blood families from the poorer section of Mercy's Bend. "Martha?" Ruth said, confused. The older woman climbed down from her wagon with surprising agility. "Ruth Whitaker, put that gun down before you hurt yourself. Mr. Morrison, Marshall Keller, you men ought to be ashamed. 15 armed men against one wounded man and a widow? Is this what passes for justice in Mercy's Bend? This is none of your concern." "Mrs. Henderson," Morrison said coldly. "It certainly is my concern when armed mobs threaten innocent women." Martha moved to stand beside Ruth. "I've known Ruth Whitaker for 2 years. She's a good Christian woman who's shown nothing but kindness to everyone, regardless of their station." "She's harboring a savage," someone protested. "I see a wounded man who needed help," Martha retorted. "Last I checked, the Good Samaritan didn't ask the beaten man his nationality before showing mercy." Reverend Davies stepped forward. "Perhaps we should all calm down and remember that vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to angry mobs." "Pretty words," Keller said. "But the law is the law." "And what law has been broken?" Martha demanded. "Saving a life? Since when is that a crime?" The crowd began to murmur, some of Morrison's men looking uncomfortable. The Mexican families watched silently, but their presence was a reminder that not everyone in the territory viewed the Apache as irredeemable enemies. Morrison sensed the shift in mood. "Marshall, do your duty, or I'll find someone who will." But before Keller could act, Taza straightened despite his wound. "Enough blood," he said loudly. "I will go, but woman stays free. She is innocent of all but kindness." "No," Ruth said desperately. "Taza, no." He turned to her, his eyes soft despite the pain. "You gave me life. Let me give you yours." "That's not how this works," Ruth said, tears streaming down her face. "We're supposed to leave together. You said I was yours. And you are," he said gently. "Always, in this life and next. But you must live. Ruth, live free." He stepped forward, hands raised, moving away from Ruth's protective stance. The men tensed, weapons rising. "I surrender," Taza said clearly. "But know this, woman saved me not because she is traitor to her people, but because she is best of them. If you punish kindness, if you destroy mercy, you destroy what makes you different from ones you call savage." The words hung in the air, challenging and true. For a moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then Marshall Keller made his decision. "Take him," Marshall Keller ordered, and 2 men moved forward to seize Taza. But Ruth's rifle swung toward them, her face set with deadly determination. "Over my dead body," she said. "That can still be arranged." Morrison snarled, but Martha Henderson stepped between them. "Samuel Morrison, you listen to me," she said sharply. "I've held my tongue for too long, watching you throw your weight around this town, but I knew your mother, God rest her soul, and she'd be spinning in her grave to see what you've become. How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to—" Martha's voice rose. "You want to shoot an unarmed woman for the crime of showing mercy? Go ahead, but you'll have to shoot me first, and then explain to the whole territory how you murdered 2 defenseless women to get your hands on 40 acres of dusty land." The Mexican families had begun to dismount from their wagons, forming a loose line beside Martha. They said nothing, but their presence spoke volumes. These were people who knew what it meant to be caught between worlds, to be judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their hearts. Reverend Davies cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should consider a compromise. The Apache is wounded. Let Mrs. Whitaker tend to him. Then escort him to the border. No blood need be shed today. He's a criminal," Keller insisted. But his voice lacked conviction. "What crimes?" Martha challenged. "Name them. Specific crimes, with witnesses that this particular man committed." Silence stretched out. Finally, one of the soldiers spoke up. "They're all criminals, every last Apache. They've been raiding and killing for years." "And we've been doing the same to them," said Miguel Hernandez, one of the Mexican ranchers. "My grandmother was Apache. Does that make me half criminal?" The crowd stirred uneasily. The clear-cut lines of civilization versus savagery were blurring, and many found it uncomfortable. Ruth felt Taza sway behind her. His breathing labored. The new wound was bleeding freely, soaking his shirt. "He needs help," she said. "Let me get him inside. Then we can discuss this like civilized people." "Civilized?" Morrison spat. "You gave up any claim to civilization when you took that savage to your bed." "Enough." Reverend Davies's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Morrison, your language is unbecoming of a Christian man. Whatever has transpired here, we are not judges appointed by God. Only He knows the heart. Pretty words from a Mexican priest." Someone muttered. Davies turned toward the speaker. "I ministered to your wife when she was dying. Jim Watson. Was I too Mexican then?" The man flushed and looked away. Ruth seized the moment of uncertainty. "Taza, inside, now." She backed toward the door, rifle still raised, and he followed, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "If they try to leave," Morrison began. "They won't," Martha said firmly. "I'll stay here myself to guarantee it, but that man needs medical attention, unless you want murder on your conscience." Once inside, Ruth barred the door and turned to Taza. He was pale beneath his bronze skin, blood seeping between his fingers. "Let me see," she said, reaching for his shirt. "No time," he said. "They will not wait long. Morrison wants blood. Then we give them what they want." Ruth's mind raced, but not the way they expect. She worked quickly, gathering supplies while explaining her plan. Taza listened, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and finally, admiration. "You are, what is word, devious," he said with a slight smile. "Desperate," Ruth corrected. "But if it saves your life, I'll be whatever I need to be." A half-hour later, she emerged from the house alone, her face composed. The crowd had grown restless, some arguing for immediate action, others counseling patience. "Where is he?" Morrison demanded. "Dying," Ruth said flatly. "The wound has gone bad. Fever's taken him. He's delirious, calling for his gods." She let her voice crack. "I doubt he'll last the night." Keller pushed past her into the house, several men following. They found Taza on the bed, apparently unconscious, his skin burning with fever. His breathing was shallow, labored. When Keller roughly shook him, he moaned but didn't wake. "Could be pretending," Morrison said suspiciously. "Look at the wound." Ruth said they'd made it appear far worse than it was. using beef blood to simulate infection. Blood poisoning. I've seen it before. Dr. Holcomb, who'd arrived with the later crowd, bent to examine Taza. Ruth held her breath. The doctor was elderly, but competent. After a moment, he straightened. She's right. The fever's real enough, whether from the wound or something else. He shrugged. Either way, moving him would likely kill him. Then we wait. Morrison said, "Post guards. When he's well enough to move, he hangs." "You want to post men to watch a dying Indian?" Martha asked incredulously. "Don't you have better uses for your time?" The crowd was already beginning to disperse, the excitement fading. Some looked ashamed. Others merely disappointed at the anticlimactic ending. The Mexican families departed with quiet dignity, but not before Miguel Hernandez caught Ruth's eye and nodded slightly, a promise of support if needed. Morrison stationed 2 men outside before leaving with a final threat. "This isn't over. Ruth, one way or another, you'll pay for your choices." As night fell, Ruth tended to Taza's actual wound while maintaining the pretense for the guards. The fever was partly real, his body fighting infection, but not nearly as severe as they'd made it appear. A mixture of certain plants Taza had taught her about helped create the symptoms without the danger. "How long can we keep this up?" she asked quietly. "Few days. Maybe. Then they will grow suspicious." Ruth nodded. She'd bought them time, but not much. They needed a better plan. It came from an unexpected source. Near midnight, Martha returned with a covered basket. "For the patient," she told the guards loudly. Then, more quietly to Ruth, "There's more than food in there." Inside, along with bread and preserves, Ruth found a sealed letter. She recognized the handwriting. Father Francisco from the old Spanish mission 40 miles south. Sanctuary. The letter read simply, "Come when you can. The old paths are watched by friends." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Martha, I don't know how to thank you." "Then don't," the older woman said briskly. "Just be ready. Tomorrow night, there'll be a distraction. Something to draw the guards away. You'll have maybe an hour to get clear." "Why are you helping us?" Martha was quiet for a moment. "I had a daughter once, fell in love with a Mexican boy. I let my pride and fear drive them away. She died in childbirth in some mining camp, alone, because I couldn't see past skin color to the heart beneath." Her voice grew firm. "I won't make that mistake again." The next day crawled by. Ruth maintained the charade, even as Taza grew stronger. The guards grew bored, occasionally peering through the window, but mostly playing cards on the porch. As sunset approached, Ruth heard shouting from the direction of town. One of the guards stood, shading his eyes. "Fire! Looks like the Morrisons' barn!" Both guards looked torn between duty and the desire to help fight the fire. After a moment of heated discussion, one mounted his horse. "I'll go see. You stay here. He's dying anyway. Right?" The remaining guard settled back into his chair, but his attention was clearly divided. Ruth waited, every nerve taut. Then she heard it, the soft hoot of an owl. 3 times. The signal Martha had promised, moving quietly. She helped Taza to his feet. They slipped out the back, where Samson waited, already hitched to the wagon. Hidden beneath hay were their supplies and what few valuables Ruth possessed. They had made it perhaps a mile when hoofbeats thundered behind them. Ruth's heart sank, but Taza squeezed her hand. "Keep going. Do not look back." But the rider wasn't pursuing. He was escorting. Miguel Hernandez pulled alongside. "The old mission road is clear," he said simply. "My people are watching. Go with God." Other riders appeared from the darkness. Mexican vaqueros. A few mixed-blood traders. Even some Anglos Ruth recognized as having Apache wives or mixed children. They formed a protective corridor, ensuring safe passage. "Thank you," Ruth said, her voice thick with emotion. "We protect our own," Miguel said simply. "And anyone who shows mercy to those in need is our own." They traveled through the night, the desert alive with hidden watchers ensuring their safety. As dawn broke, they saw the mission's bell tower rising from the desert like a promise. Father Francisco met them at the gate, his weathered face kind. "Welcome," he said simply. "Rest here as long as needed. There are many roads from this place, and not all are watched by those who wish you harm." Inside the mission walls, Ruth felt the tension of weeks drain away. They were given a small room, simple but clean. As she helped Taza settle onto the narrow bed, he caught her hand. "You saved me again," he said softly. "We saved each other," Ruth corrected. "That's what partners do." "Partners," Taza repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, but more than partners. More than partners," Ruth agreed. That night, despite exhaustion, they held each other close, aware of how nearly they'd lost everything. In the morning, they would need to plan where to go, how to build a life together in a world that would never fully accept them. But for now, in this moment of safety and peace, they simply existed. Two hearts beating as one, two souls who had found home in each other against all odds. Outside their window, the mission bells rang for evening prayers, their bronze voices carrying across the desert. It sounded, Ruth thought, like a blessing, like hope. 3 days at the mission had given them time to rest and plan. But Ruth knew they couldn't stay. Father Francisco had warned them that Morrison's men had been asking questions in nearby settlements. The net was closing. "California," Taza said as they sat in the mission garden. "Many peoples there, Apache, Mexican, white, all mixed. We could disappear." Ruth nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of traveling even further from Tom's grave. But that life was gone now, as surely as if it had been burned to ash. They left before dawn on the 4th day, supplied by the mission with food and water for the journey. Father Francisco blessed them at the gate, pressing a small wooden cross into Ruth's hands. "For protection," he said, "not just from God, but from those who claim to act in His name. Show this at any mission along the way, and you will find shelter." The desert stretched endlessly before them, but they were no longer alone. Miguel's network of sympathizers had spread word, and they found unexpected aid along the way. Fresh water left at certain rocks, safe paths marked by subtle signs only Taza could read. They had been traveling for 5 days when disaster struck again. Ruth had gone to fill their water gourds at a stream, while Taza tended the animals. She heard horses approaching and quickly hid among the reeds. But her heart sank as she recognized the voices. "Track ends here," she heard Keller say. "They watered here, maybe yesterday. Keep searching." Morrison's voice was harsh with frustration. "They can't have gone far. That Apache is still weak, and she's just a woman." Ruth held her breath, pressing deeper into the reeds. If they found the wagon tracks leading away from the stream. A gunshot split the air, and Ruth's blood froze. Then another. She heard men shouting, horses whinnying in panic. Against every instinct, she crept forward until she could see Taza stood in the open, bow in hand, an arrow already nocked. 2 of Morrison's men lay on the ground, clutching wounds. The others had taken cover, firing wildly. "Surrender, savage!" Keller shouted. "You're outnumbered." Taza's response was another arrow, this one catching a man in the shoulder. But Ruth could see he was exposed, vulnerable. It was only a matter of time before a bullet found him. She made her decision. Circling through the brush, she came up behind Morrison's position. The men were focused on Taza, not expecting danger from behind. Ruth raised Tom's rifle, remembering Taza's patient teaching over the past weeks. "Drop your weapons," she said clearly. Morrison spun, his face contorting with rage. "You! Drop them, or I'll drop you!" Ruth said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "You won't shoot," Morrison sneered. "You're not a killer." "I wasn't a lot of things until recently." Ruth replied, "Want to find out what else I've become?" For a moment, the tableau held, Ruth with her rifle trained on Morrison, his men uncertain whether to turn their guns on her or keep them on Taza, who had another arrow ready. Then Morrison made his move, swinging his pistol toward Ruth. She didn't hesitate. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and Morrison cried out, dropping his weapon as blood bloomed on his gun arm. "The next one goes in your chest," Ruth said coldly. "You shot me!" Morrison's voice was high with disbelief. "You actually shot me. And I'll do it again if you don't call off your men." Keller had turned at the shot, his face grim. "This has gone too far, Morrison. We're lawmen, not hired killers." "She's a criminal." Morrison cradled his wounded arm. "She's a woman defending herself and her companion." Keller said, "He seemed to have aged years in the past days. I've got 2 men dead, 3 wounded, chasing a couple who just want to be left alone. For what? Your wounded pride? For justice?" "No," Keller said quietly. "For vengeance, and I'll have no more part in it." He holstered his weapon. "Mrs. Whitaker, you and your companion have 1 hour to clear out. After that, if I see you in my jurisdiction again, I'll do my duty, but I won't chase you beyond it." "Marshal," Morrison protested. "Enough." Keller's voice cracked like a whip. "You've turned me into something I swore I'd never be. A man who hunts women and wounded men like animals. No more." He turned his horse and rode away. After a moment of confusion, his remaining men followed, helping the wounded. Only Morrison remained, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll see you both hang if it's the last thing I do." "Then you'll die trying," Taza said, stepping into view. His arrow was aimed at Morrison's heart. "Leave now. Do not follow." "This is only warning." Morrison looked between them, Ruth with her rifle steady, Taza with his bow drawn. Something in their faces must have finally penetrated his rage, because he backed toward his horse. "You'll pay," he said again, but the threat sounded hollow now. "Both of you will pay." After he rode off, Ruth's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, shaking. Taza was beside her in an instant, gathering her into his arms. "You saved me," he said softly. "My warrior woman." "I shot him," Ruth said, still stunned by her own actions. "I actually shot a man. To protect, to survive. No shame in that." They didn't wait the hour Keller had given them. Within minutes they were moving again, pushing hard toward the California border. But word of the confrontation spread faster than they could travel. At the next settlement, they found wanted posters, crude drawings that could have been anyone, but the descriptions were accurate enough. Ruth Whitaker, white woman, traveling with Apache male, wanted for attempted murder, theft, and moral crimes. "We need to change how we look," Ruth said, studying the poster, "and how we travel." At a Mexican trading post, they traded the wagon for horses and supplies. Ruth cut her hair short and dressed in men's clothing, hiding her figure beneath loose shirts and a wide hat. Taza reluctantly cut his long hair to shoulder length and adopted Mexican vaquero clothing. From a distance, they could pass for any number of drifters heading west. They traveled at night now, hiding during the day. The landscape changed from desert to scrub to the first hints of pine forests. California was close, but so were their pursuers. It was at a waterhole near the border that they met her, a tiny, fierce Apache woman named Maria who emerged from the rocks like a ghost. Ruth reached for her rifle, but Taza stopped her with a gesture. The woman spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing emphatically. Taza's responses were shorter, but Ruth caught the reverence in his tone. "She is medicine woman," he explained to Ruth. "From my mother's clan. She says she has been dreaming of us." Maria switched to broken English, fixing Ruth with penetrating dark eyes. "You, white woman who sees with clear eyes, I know you." "You don't know me," Ruth said carefully. "Know your spirit, saw and dream. You carry new life, Apache life." Ruth's hand went unconsciously to her belly. "That's impossible. I can't." But even as she said it, she realized her monthly courses were late. The exhaustion she'd attributed to their flight, the occasional nausea. Maria smiled, 1,000 wrinkles creasing her weathered face. "Desert blooms when rain comes after long drought. You are drought. He is rain." Taza looked stunned. "Ruth, could it be? I don't know," Ruth said, tears starting to fall. "Maybe. I thought I couldn't, but maybe." Maria spoke again in Apache, and Taza translated. She says the child is why she was sent, to guide us to safety. There is a place, a valley where Apache and Mexican and some whites live together. Hidden, safe. She will take us there. Can we trust her? Ruth asked, though she already knew the answer. The old woman radiated a strength and wisdom that transcended language. She is family, Taza said simply. And she is right. If you carry child, our child, we need more than running. We need home. They followed Maria into mountains Ruth hadn't even known existed, through passes so narrow they had to lead the horses. The old woman moved like someone a quarter her age, never hesitating, never looking back. On the third day of climbing, they crested a ridge and Ruth gasped. Below lay a valley of impossible green, fed by mountain streams. She could see cultivated fields, orchards, and scattered houses that seemed to grow from the earth itself. Hidden Valley, Maria said in English. Safe place, old treaty land everyone forgets. Apache, Mexican, others, all outcasts, all family now. As they descended, people emerged to watch their arrival. Ruth saw Apache faces, Mexican ones, and yes, some white ones too. Children of mixed heritage played together, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. It was like nothing she had ever imagined could exist. A tall man with Apache features but wearing Mexican clothes approached. He spoke with Maria, then turned to them. I am Joseph Redhawk, he said in perfect English. I lead the council here. Maria has told us of you. You are welcome. Redhawk? Taza said sharply. You are. Your father's cousin. I thought all our family died at the Peace Council. Joseph's face was grave. I am glad to be wrong. That night, they sat around a communal fire, and Ruth heard their story spread through the valley. A white woman who saved an Apache warrior, an Apache who chose love over vengeance, a child growing between two worlds, proof that different peoples could create something new together. You will be safe here, Joseph assured them. The outside world has forgotten this place exists. We protect our own. Ruth looked around at the faces in the firelight, so many stories of loss and survival, of love that transcended boundaries. For the first time in over a year, she felt something she'd thought lost forever. Home. We'll need to be married, she said to Taza. Properly, in whatever way honors both our traditions. Taza smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. Tomorrow, Maria will perform Apache ceremony. There is also a priest here, if you wish Christian words too. Both, Ruth decided. Our child should know all parts of their heritage. That night, in a simple adobe house that the community had prepared for them, Ruth lay in Taza's arms and felt the fear of the past weeks finally begin to fade. Do you regret? Taza asked softly, leaving your world behind. Ruth thought of Mercy's Bend, of the narrow life she'd lived there, of the woman she'd been, existing but not truly living. Then she thought of this valley, of the unlikely family they'd found, of the child growing beneath her heart. I didn't leave my world, she said. I found it. The wedding took place at dawn, as was the Apache way. Ruth wore a dress of soft doeskin that Maria had gifted her, decorated with beads and shells. Taza stood proud in traditional Apache clothing, his cousin Joseph beside him as witness. Maria performed the ceremony in the old tongue, her voice rising and falling like wind through the canyon. She bound Ruth and Taza's wrists with a cord of braided sweetgrass, symbolizing their union. When it came time for Ruth to speak her vows in English, her voice was clear and strong. I take you not in spite of who you are, but because of it, I choose you, your people, your ways, as you have chosen mine. Where you walk, I walk. Your fight is my fight. Your peace is my peace. Father Miguel, the elderly priest who tended to the valley's spiritual needs, blessed their union in the afternoon. The entire community gathered, bringing gifts of food, blankets, tools, everything a new family would need. Never seen anything quite like this, Father Miguel admitted to Ruth afterward. But then, God works in mysterious ways. Love that bridges such divides, surely that is holy. Life in the valley settled into a rhythm. Ruth learned to grind corn on a meditate, to weave baskets, to identify the plants Maria used for healing. Her pregnancy progressed, and with it came a sense of wonder she'd never expected to feel. Taza built their home stronger, adding rooms for the child to come. He hunted with the other men, bringing back deer and elk. In the evenings, he would place his hand on Ruth's growing belly and sing soft Apache lullabies. "What if they come here?" Ruth asked one night, the old fear surfacing. "Morrison won't give up easily. Joseph has watchers," Taza assured her. "Hidden trails, secret ways. No one finds this place who is not meant to." But Ruth's fears proved prophetic. In her 7th month, as the first snows dusted the peaks, a rider came with urgent news. Marshal Keller had been replaced, and the new marshal was Morrison's puppet. They had hired trackers, Paiute scouts who knew the old trails. They were coming. The council met that night. Some argued for fighting, others for deeper hiding. Ruth listened to the debate with growing dread. "We cannot bring war to this place," an elder Apache woman said. "Too many children, too many who cannot fight. But we cannot let them take our people," a Mexican farmer argued. "We came here to be free." Joseph raised his hand for silence. "There is another way. We make them believe they have found what they seek." The plan was dangerous but clever. At an abandoned mining camp 2 valleys over, they would stage a scene, evidence of a tragic end to Ruth and Taza's flight, clothing, blood, signs of an animal attack. The story would be simple. The fugitives had died in the mountains, their bodies consumed by wolves or bears. "I'll need to go," Ruth said, "to leave something personal, something that would convince them." "Too dangerous," Taza protested. "You carry our child, which is why it has to be believable." Ruth insisted. "They know I wouldn't abandon certain things unless I had no choice." In the end, a small party set out. Ruth, Taza, Joseph, and 2 skilled trackers. They reached the mining camp under cover of darkness and set their scene carefully. Ruth left Tom's Bible, water-damaged and torn. She scattered pages from her journal, the entries ending abruptly. Taza left the knife he'd carried since boyhood, its handle broken as if in struggle. They used deer blood liberally, creating a grim tableau. The trackers added realistic touches, claw marks on trees, signs of bodies dragged away. It was macabre work, but necessary. "Now we wait," Joseph said, "and watch." They didn't have to wait long. Morrison's party arrived 2 days later, 20 men strong, led by the Paiute trackers, from their hiding place high in the rocks. Ruth watched Morrison dismount at the camp, even from a distance. She could see the satisfaction on his face as he examined the scene. He picked up Tom's Bible, flipped through the blood-stained pages. One of the trackers spoke to him, gesturing at the drag marks leading into the forest. "Bears," she heard the tracker say. "Maybe wolves after nothing left." Morrison spent an hour searching, but the scene had been well crafted. Finally, he gathered the evidence: the Bible, the knife, some torn clothing. "Mount up," he called to his men. "We're done here." "That's it?" one of the men asked. "We came all this way." "They're dead," Morrison said with finality. "Got what they deserved. The wilderness gave them justice, we couldn't." As the party rode away, Ruth felt Taza's hand find hers. It was over. They were truly free. The journey back to the valley was lighter despite Ruth's advanced pregnancy. The community welcomed them with quiet celebration. They had faced the threat and survived through cleverness rather than violence. Winter settled over the valley like a protective blanket. Ruth grew heavy with child, and Maria tended her with herbs and wisdom. The women of the valley, Apache, Mexican, white, surrounded her with support. She had never felt less alone. "You carry a bridge," Maria told her one snowy evening. "Child of 2 worlds, belonging to both, rejected by neither. This child will be hope." Labor came with a late winter storm. Ruth had helped deliver calves and foals, but nothing had prepared her for this. The pain was overwhelming, primal. But Taza stayed beside her, letting her grip his hand until her nails drew blood, whispering encouragement in both Apache and English. "I can't," she gasped at one point. "It's too much. You are strongest woman I know. Taza said firmly, You saved me. You shot Morrison. You walked away from everything you knew. This you can do. Maria's experienced hands guided her through the worst of it. The other women sang, Apache birthing songs mixed with Spanish prayers and Protestant hymns. The sound wove together into something entirely new, entirely beautiful. When their son finally arrived, his cry was strong and clear. Maria placed him on Ruth's chest, and she stared down at the tiny face. Taza's strong features softened by her fairer coloring, dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. What will you name him? Father Miguel asked when he came to bless the child. Ruth and Taza had discussed this at length. The child would need names for both worlds. Thomas Redhawk, Ruth said. Thomas for the man who brought me west, who died so I could find new life. Redhawk for his father's line, for strength and vision. And his Apache name? Maria asked. Taza spoke solemnly. Puma who walks between, for he will walk between worlds and belong to both. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and filling the streams. Ruth stood at the door of their home, Thomas sleeping against her chest, watching Taza work in their garden. It was a simple life, far from the grand dreams she'd once harbored with Tom, but it was real, and it was theirs. Neighbors passed by, the Mexican family who lived up the hill, the elderly Apache couple who had taken them under their wing, the mixed-race children who loved to peek at the baby. Each greeted them warmly, without judgment or reservation. Do you ever miss it? She asked Taza that evening. Your old life, being a warrior? Taza considered, bouncing Thomas gently. Warrior protects his people. I protect you, our son, this valley. Still warrior, just different war. And winning it? He smiled, the expression still rare enough to make her heart skip. Every day we live free, we win. A year passed. Thomas grew strong, crawling then walking, babbling in a mixture of English and Apache that made everyone laugh. Ruth planted a larger garden, learning from the other women how to coax life from the mountain soil. Taza became one of the valley's best hunters, providing not just for their family, but for elderly neighbors who could no longer hunt themselves. News from the outside world filtered in occasionally. The Indian wars were winding down, treaties being signed and broken. The frontier was becoming civilized, which meant less room for those who didn't fit neat categories. More will come, Joseph said one evening at council. More mixed families, more outcasts. We must be ready. And they did come. A white woman with her half-Mexican children, fleeing an abusive husband, a black cowboy and his Apache wife, a Chinese merchant family driven out by violence. The valley grew, adapted, survived. Ruth kept a new journal, filling it with recipes that blended traditions, remedies Maria taught her, stories the elders shared. She wrote about their daily life. Thomas's first words, both Mama and Shima. The harvest celebration where Apache drums mixed with Mexican guitars. The winter Taza taught the mixed children to track deer. You write our story, Taza observed one evening. Someone should. Ruth replied. So Thomas knows where he came from, so he understands that love can bloom anywhere, even in the hardest ground. What will you call it? Ruth thought for a moment. The truth, simply the truth. As she wrote by candlelight, Thomas sleeping between them, Taza carving another figure, this one a bird in flight, Ruth felt the profound peace of a life fully lived. She had lost much. Tom, her old home, her place in conventional society, but she had gained so much more. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the valley. Inside, her family slept safe and whole. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 5 years passed in the hidden valley like a dream of peace. Thomas grew tall and strong, his skin bronze from the sun, his laugh echoing off canyon walls. He spoke 3 languages fluently, switching between them as naturally as breathing. Ruth often watched him play with the other children, Apache, Mexican, mixed, and marveled at how easily they wove their different worlds together. But even paradise could not keep the outside world at bay forever. The frontier was closing, the wild spaces shrinking. Railroad lines crept closer, bringing settlers, soldiers, and the inexorable march of what men called progress. It was Joseph who brought the news that would change everything. He returned from a trading expedition with a grave expression, calling an emergency council. "The government is mapping these mountains," he announced. "Survey teams preparing for a new rail route. They will find us within the year." The valley erupted in worried voices. Some spoke of fighting, others of fleeing deeper into Mexico. Ruth sat quietly, Thomas on her lap, feeling the weight of decision pressing down. "There is another way," a new voice spoke up. It was Eleanor Hartley, a recent arrival, a widow from Boston who had married a Navajo man and fled west after his death. "We make ourselves legal." "Legal?" Someone scoffed. "They don't make laws for people like us. But they do make laws for towns." Eleanor continued. She had been a teacher, educated in law and letters. "If we incorporate, file the proper papers, establish ourselves as a legitimate settlement, they'll never recognize a town of outcasts," another voice protested. "They will, if we present it correctly." Eleanor's eyes gleamed with possibility, not as a hideaway for mixed families, but as a trading post, a supply station for the railroad. "We have water, good land, strategic position. We make ourselves useful, even necessary." The debate raged through the night. Ruth found herself torn between hope and fear. Could they truly transform their hidden sanctuary into something the outside world would accept? Taza spoke late in the discussion. "Eagle does not become crow to be safe, but eagle learns to fly where hunters cannot reach. We do not change who we are. We change how world sees us." In the end, they voted to try. Eleanor would lead the legal effort, while others prepared for the possibility of discovery. If legitimacy failed, they would need escape routes ready. Ruth threw herself into the work. She helped Eleanor draft documents, carefully wording their petition to emphasize commerce and cooperation rather than their unconventional demographics. They chose a name that honored all their peoples, Harmony Wells, for the spring that fed their valley and the peace they had built. The first test came sooner than expected. A survey team stumbled upon their valley on a blazing July day. Ruth's heart stopped when she saw the uniformed men on the ridge. But Joseph had prepared them for this moment. Instead of hiding, they welcomed the surveyors openly. Fresh water, hot food, comfortable lodging, all freely offered. The team's leader, a pragmatic man named Captain Morris, was clearly surprised by what he found. "Didn't expect to find a settlement here," he said over dinner, his eyes taking in the mix of faces around the communal table. "We're a trading community," Eleanor explained smoothly. "Many of us have been here for years, serving travelers and local ranchers." Morris nodded slowly. Ruth could see him cataloging details, the well-built houses, the irrigated fields, the obvious prosperity. Whatever he had expected to find in these mountains, it wasn't this. Young Thomas chose that moment to approach, offering the captain more bread. He spoke politely in perfect English, then turned to help an elderly Apache woman in her own language, before laughing at something one of the Mexican children said in Spanish. "Remarkable," Morris murmured. "The boy speaks 3 languages? Most of our children do." Ruth said carefully, "It's useful for trade." Morris stayed 3 days, his team surveying and mapping. On the last evening, he pulled Ruth and Eleanor aside. "I know what this place really is," he said quietly. "I'm not blind. Mixed marriages, Apache living freely, folks who wouldn't be welcome elsewhere." He paused, studying their tense faces. "I also know good people when I see them. Your community works. That's rare enough to be worth preserving." "What will you report?" Eleanor asked. "The truth, that Harmony Wells is an established settlement, well-positioned to serve as a supply stop for the railroad, that its people are industrious, peaceful, and eager to cooperate with territorial authorities." He smiled slightly. "I'll leave out the details that might complicate things." After the survey team left, the valley buzzed with nervous energy. They had passed the first test, but greater challenges lay ahead. The railroad would bring scrutiny. Outsiders, perhaps recognition of faces better left forgotten. It was Taza who suggested the solution. We hide in open sight, become what they expect to see. They developed a careful strategy. When outsiders visited, certain adjustments were made. Mixed couples became employer and housekeeper or rancher and foreman. The children learned to modulate their behavior, emphasizing whichever heritage would cause least question. It chafed at Ruth's sense of honesty, but she understood the necessity. They were not changing who they were, merely how they presented themselves to a world not yet ready for their truth. The railroad came through 2 years later, bringing exactly the challenges they had feared. Work crews, many rough men with rougher attitudes, merchants looking to establish businesses, officials checking papers and asking questions. One morning, Ruth's blood ran cold when she recognized a face from the past. Jim Watson, who had ridden with Morrison years ago, now worked as a railroad supervisor. She pulled her shawl up, keeping her face shadowed, but Thomas ran past at just the wrong moment. "Tommy, slow down," she called without thinking. Watson's head snapped around. His eyes narrowed, studying her face. Ruth forced herself to meet his gaze calmly, though her heart hammered. "Do I know you, ma'am?" Watson asked slowly. "I don't believe so," Ruth replied in the slightly accented English she had practiced. "I am Senora Rodriguez. My husband and I run the trading post." Watson looked uncertain. The Ruth Whitaker he had known would never have worn Mexican clothing, never have spoken with such inflection. And surely she was dead, lost in the mountains with her Apache lover years ago. "My mistake," he said finally. "You reminded me of someone, but she's long gone." That night, Ruth and Taza held each other close, aware how narrow their escape had been. But as days passed and Watson showed no further interest, they began to breathe easier. Their careful performance was working. The railroad brought prosperity along with danger. Harmony Wells grew from hidden sanctuary to thriving town. New businesses opened, carefully managed to maintain their community's values. The school expanded, openly teaching multiple languages and cultures, presented as practical education for a trading town. Thomas flourished in this environment. At 10 years old, he served as translator for railroad negotiations, charming officials with his quick wit and easy manner. Ruth watched her son navigate between worlds with a grace she still struggled to achieve. "He makes it look simple," she said to Taza one evening as they watched Thomas mediate a dispute between an Apache elder and a railroad engineer. "Because for him, it is simple." Taza replied, "We had to learn to walk between worlds. He was born there." Their success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. A newspaper from San Francisco sent a reporter to write about the miracle of Harmony Wells, where East meets West in perfect accord. The resulting article, while romanticized, brought curious visitors and new settlers. Not all were welcome. Some came seeking to exploit what they saw as naive natives and desperate outcasts. But the community had developed ways of dealing with such people, either converting them to their values or encouraging them to move on. The greatest test came when the territory of Arizona began pushing for statehood. Officials arrived to assess whether settlements like Harmony Wells met the standards for inclusion in the proposed state. The lead assessor was a stern woman named Margaret Thornton, sent specifically to evaluate the moral character of frontier towns. Her arrival sent ripples of anxiety through the community. Ruth was chosen as part of the delegation to meet with Mrs. Thornton. She dressed carefully, respectable but not ostentatious, her wedding ring prominent. Let the assessor assume what she wished about which marriage it represented. "Mrs. Thornton," Ruth said warmly, "welcome to Harmony Wells. We're honored by your visit." The older woman's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Mrs. Redhawk," Ruth said simply, "my husband and I help manage the trading post." Over the following days, Mrs. Thornton investigated every aspect of their town. She visited the school, where children of all backgrounds learned together. She attended Father Miguel's service, noting the mix of traditions woven into the liturgy. She observed the town council, where Apache elders sat beside Mexican merchants and white settlers. On her last evening, Mrs. Thornton requested a private meeting with Ruth. They sat in the small office behind the trading post, afternoon light slanting through the windows. "You're Ruth Whitaker." "Mrs." Thornton said without preamble. "I remember the stories. White woman who ran off with an Apache warrior. Caused quite a scandal." Ruth's mouth went dry, but she kept her composure. "Ruth Whitaker's dead. Mrs. Thornton. She died in the mountains years ago." "Did she?" "Mrs." Thornton studied her intently. "Or was she reborn as something else? Something better?" Ruth said nothing. Waiting. "Mrs." Thornton sighed. "I've seen many frontier towns. Mrs. Red Hawk. Most are violent, lawless, built on exploitation and greed. This place—" She gestured toward the window, where children of various backgrounds played together in the street. "This place is different. It shouldn't work, but it does." "We've tried to build something good here," Ruth said carefully. "You've built something extraordinary." "Mrs." Thornton corrected. "A glimpse of what America could be if we let it." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "My report will state that Harmony Wells exceeds all standards for inclusion in the new state. Its people are industrious, law-abiding, and morally upright." "Thank you," Ruth breathed. "Don't thank me. Just keep building. What you have here is precious. Don't let the world destroy it." As Arizona moved toward statehood, Harmony Wells secured its place within it. The community had survived through adaptation, unity, and the courage to imagine a different way of living. Ruth stood at the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. Thomas stood beside her, nearly as tall as she was now, his hand resting easily on her shoulder. "Mama," he said thoughtfully, "do you think other places will become like Harmony Wells, where people like us can just be?" Ruth thought of the long road they had traveled, the pain and loss that had led to this moment. She thought of Taza, working with other men to build a new schoolhouse. She thought of their neighbors, their chosen family, their impossible, beautiful community. "I hope so, my son," she said. "I truly hope so." In the distance, she could see riders approaching, new families seeking sanctuary, drawn by stories of a place where differences were strength, not weakness. Ruth smiled, already planning their welcome. The sun set behind the mountains, but in Harmony Wells, a different light continued to shine, the light of hope, of possibility, of love that refused to recognize the boundaries others drew. In her journal that night, Ruth wrote, "They called us outcasts, but we became pioneers, not of land, but of the heart. In trying to destroy us, they forced us to create something new, a world where Apache and white, Mexican and Chinese, all who seek peace can find home. We are no longer between worlds. We have made our own." She set down her pen, listening to the sounds of her town settling into evening, laughter in multiple languages, music that blended traditions, the peaceful noise of people who had learned to see family where others saw only strangers. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Ruth and Taza's story touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Leave a comment below and let me know. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of love, courage, and survival from the American frontier. And don't forget to share your thoughts. What did you think of Ruth and Taza's journey? Your comments mean the world to me. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset.